For many years, Mexico has played a key role in supplying crude oil to the United States. Because of how close the two countries are and their long history of trading in North America, Mexico sends millions of barrels of medium and heavy crude oil each year to U.S. refineries. But trade rules can flip on a dime. New tariff policies, especially ones shouting protection or America first, could shake up this long-standing partnership, with the US government considering tariffs as high as 25% on Mexican oil. Mexican oil companies and traders might skip the US market altogether and instead head toward markets in Europe and Asia. This change could completely alter how oil flows across North America and create unexpected new routes on the global energy map. So, what does it mean when Mexico starts looking to Europe and Asia instead of the United States? How might this shift affect American energy supplies and policies? To answer that, we need to look at what's been happening in Mexico's energy scene lately. For a long time, Mexico stuck with a government-run oil system. But after reforms in 2013 and 2014, the grip of Pemex was loosened a bit, and foreign companies were allowed to drill and produce oil. While everyone hoped production would steadily climb, the numbers haven't grown as much as expected because of issues in some oil fields and problems with infrastructure. Still, Mexico remains a major oil player, producing roughly 1.7 to 1.8 million barrels a day. A large share of this oil comes from coastal regions like Campeche Bay, and it is mostly heavy or medium gravity crude. Heavy crude is especially important for making products like asphalt in U.S. refineries located in Texas and Louisiana. However, if the U.S. government pushes through a new tariff, Mexico's situation could become very tricky. Take this example. Energy experts at Wood Mackenzie looked at a scenario with a 25% tariff. They found that Mexican oil deliveries to the U.S. could drop sharply and predicted that Mexican producers might try to make up for lost profits by turning to other markets. Other studies have shown how U.S. tariffs on steel, aluminum, and similar goods have changed trade routes before. If Mexico no longer finds buyers in the United States for its heavy oil, it might focus on selling to refineries in Europe and Asia. Similarly, once the tariffs are in place, the Mexican government is said to be planning a pivot toward Europe and Asia. Mexico's friendly ties with China could be a big advantage in this shift. In fact, China has even worked with Mexico on plans to get around U.S. tariffs, making it a likely top buyer of Mexican oil. At the same time, refineries along Europe's Mediterranean coast have the tools needed to process heavy crude, while Asian refineries, especially in China and India, are eager for medium-heavy oil. Still, this change won't come free of challenges. Shipping oil by tanker to Europe from Mexico's ports on the Atlantic is generally costlier than sending it to the United States and takes a longer route. Yet European refineries are used to handling heavy crude from places like the Middle East or North Africa, so Mexican oil might offer a welcome change in their supply mix. Sending oil all the way to Asia is an even bigger journey. Shipping from Mexico via the Suez Canal or around the Cape of Africa takes extra time and money. Still, Asia remains reachable by passing through the Strait of Malacca or Suez, even if these routes add extra costs per barrel. If the US keeps its tariffs high, Mexican sellers might decide it's better to ship their oil far away where there are no extra fees. Take this. Experts like those at Wood Mackenzie looked at what would happen if there was a 25% tariff. They figured that oil shipments from Mexico to the US would drop a lot. In turn, Mexican producers would try to cover their losses by finding new buyers. We've seen similar shifts before. US tariffs on things like steel and aluminum have changed how products move around the world. Before, the US-Mexico border, easy transportation, and refineries tuned to Mexican oil kept the market steady. But if tariffs come into play now, companies like Pemex and other Mexican exporters won't be as competitive in the US. Because of the price gap and added taxes, US refiners might start buying oil from other countries, like Canada or even Venezuela. Then Mexico would have to find new markets, and it would end up competing with oil giants like Russia and nations in the Middle East for buyers in Asia. This shakeup in North American oil flows might cause a chain reaction. Canada, too, is mulling over the idea of selling its oil to Asia or Europe if US tariffs or limits hurt its business. Imagine if both Canada and Mexico lost access to the US market at the same time. Where would American refineries get their heavy crude oil then? They might have to rely on regions like the Middle East or look to Venezuela, which is still under sanctions. That would push up costs at US refineries, and those extra costs would likely end up in the prices consumers pay, which could spark inflation. This is much like what happened when the US slapped tariffs on steel and aluminum during the Trump era. Protectionism might help local producers in the short run, but it can spell trouble for refineries and everyday buyers. Now, one might ask, is it easy for Mexico to shift its oil business to Europe or Asia? There are quite a few hurdles. First off, shipping by sea gets more expensive for tankers leaving Mexican ports. Taking the Panama Canal to reach Asia is an option, but huge tankers might run into size limits or have to pay higher transit fees. Another route is going around Africa or using the Suez Canal, which adds extra costs too. Plus, European or Asian refineries might need to adjust their setups to handle the specific types of oil from Mexico, like Maya or Isthmus grades. Still, the global energy market is flexible. Buyers can always be found if the price is right. Mexico might have to lower its oil prices to make up for the US tariffs, though that would mean less profit. Ultimately, a balance has to be struck between the high tariffs in the US and the extra shipping costs to Europe or Asia. In Asia, refineries in China, India, and some Southeast Asian nations rely a lot on Middle Eastern oil. Lately, they have also been buying oil from places like West Africa, Brazil, and Colombia. Mexican oil could join this mix. In fact, China or India might even decide to buy more oil from Mexico as part of a political move to diversify their sources away from the US influence. If the US pushes tariffs high, focusing on Asia might be the smartest move for Mexico. Europe, however, faces its own hurdles with long shipping distances. Yet European refineries are eager to find alternatives to heavy oil from places like the Baltic or the Middle East. With Russian oil under sanctions from the Russia-Ukraine conflict and Middle Eastern oil sometimes coming with high prices or political risks, Mexico might fill that gap. Of course, Mexico's distance from Europe is a disadvantage, but Europe, eager to mix up its energy sources, might find Mexican crude attractive, especially if Mexico meets green energy standards and ESG criteria. European buyers will pay close attention to how well Mexico follows green practices and meets ESG rules. All these plans depend on what happens in US politics. The tariffs might stay as a threat without ever being put in place. Washington might decide to step back, since high tariffs could shake up the US market, push prices up, get heavy pushback from the oil lobby, and hurt everyday shoppers. Remember what happened with steel and aluminum during the Trump years? Many countries, including Mexico, hit back with their own tariffs. Trade routes got all mixed up, and eventually, some deals were struck to ease the mess. If similar moves hit the oil market, expect a fresh wave of diplomatic tension between Mexico and the United States. Even though Mexico relies a lot on the US, the biggest oil buyer in North America, it seems to be planning new routes, sending a clear message: we will find our own buyers. There is no empty space in global trade. When one door closes, another opens. Mexico might decide that if the US builds a wall, we'll head over to Asia and Europe instead. This move won't be a win-win situation for everyone. Mexico would have to bear extra shipping costs, US refineries might find it hard to get heavy oil, and prices for consumers could go up. Meanwhile, countries like India and China might step in, buying Mexican oil at lower prices, while the European Union could strike fresh deals with Mexico as it looks for alternatives to Russian oil. This situation is something Washington would struggle to control. The global energy game is complex. There's OPEC, the Middle East, Russia, Venezuela, Canada, all important pieces on a huge chessboard. If Mexico shuts the US market for its Mayan crude, it could easily start shipping to Europe and Asia. This shows that countries like Canada and Mexico, even though they work closely with the US under agreements like USMCA, are already exploring other paths when faced with one-sided tariffs. Canada, for instance, is hinting at deeper ties with Europe and the United Kingdom. And Mexico might be doing the same with its oil. In short, they're saying, the US market is great, but if it costs too much to be here, we'll change direction. Even though geography and shipping challenges make it tough to find new markets outside the US, global trade keeps opening up new opportunities. If Mexico takes this path, Asian refineries, and perhaps even some in Europe, could welcome its oil to help cut down their reliance on Middle Eastern supplies. Who knows? The US government might see these risks and decide to keep the high tariffs only on paper, without really enforcing them. After all, if US refineries start facing shortages of heavy crude, and if prices skyrocket, consumers will not be happy. That's the tricky side of protectionism. It can shield certain local businesses for a while, but it might end up hurting refineries and everyday people in the long run. Oil is a strategic product, and when you mess with its trade rules, the effects can be felt pretty quickly. What do you think of this scenario? Is Mexico really ready to switch gears and sell its oil to refineries in Europe and Asia? Or is it just talk? If the US pushes on with these tariffs, what kind of challenges will Mexico face? And will European and Asian buyers be excited about Mexico's heavy crude? Or will they be put off by the high shipping costs? Maybe we're looking at a full-blown trade war where everyone loses a bit. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this discussion, please subscribe to our channel for more updates. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.